How's it going, everybody? This is Coach Hike coming to you from Fort Worth Strong, and today we are going to be starting the third part of the recent series that's been going on, which is going to be our adapted modalities of movement. This month of December, we are going to be focusing on our hinge, and we are going to be talking about today a couple different places that hinge motion applies. So first, right off the bat, I do want to cover, this is not medical advice by any means. This should not supplement your need to go see a doctor if you have sustained any sort of injury. And if you have a chronic or ongoing injury, please make sure that you consult a physician before you go through a training program. With that being said, these are all going to be tips and things that you can utilize in the gym, things that I use on myself and I use with my clients to help benefit and improve our hinge movement that, again, applies across a variety of movements. We're going to do this video in a couple parts. First, I'm going to talk about a few things that people run into very often that are attributed to problems with the hinge. First is going to be lower back pain, and you'll see it a lot. People will round their back, and it comes in a couple different ways. It's kind of a question of the chicken or the egg. So you have people that lift a certain way and then sustain an injury. You have people that have a weakness that ends up developing a bad movement pattern and then they become injured. It's sometimes hard to say one or the other. The other thing is that a lot of people are sedentary. They work a lot of jobs where you're sitting in a desk, you're sitting in a chair, you're hunched over. So we have a lot of that problem in the tilt in the hips, which is going to create problems going and trying to lift. So there's that. The second thing is going to be any sort of dysfunction or imbalance in the hips. The hips are super important, if not going to be probably the most pivotal point of where that hinge is going to occur properly. So if we do have any sort of issue with internal and external rotation, if we have a problem with flexion and extension in the hip, those are all going to be things in the planes of movement that are occurring at the hip that can cause problems. And then from there, we're going to have what is kind of a mix of the two, and can more so be referred to as, kind of like an umbrella with it, which is going to be complications. So complications and compensations, those two big C words, are going to be things that you can see as a result of any sort of imbalances or injuries that may occur, where you may notice you start to pull to one side or the other. If you do a good leg day and maybe you're doing deadlifts or RDLs or some sort of variation of a pull with the legs, you may notice, man, my left leg gets really sore, my right leg not so much. Or, man, I always pull my back, I don't know how to get my hips involved. So talking about that, the first thing we're going to do is going to talk about how the movement should begin and what we should be focusing on. And then I'm going to give you all a few movements that we can use to build into, replace possibly, or supplement, and then use to help improve different parts of our hinge and our pull. So talking about, first of all, what we are looking for in the motion. We're going to start from the ground up, beginning with the feet. Okay? When I do any sort of hinge, whether that be a deadlift or any sort of pulling movement, for any of you that do any sort of athletic training or CrossFit or Olympic lifting, I'm sure you're familiar with your cleans and your snatches. There's a huge pull motion. So with that being said, starting from the feet is important. Make sure that you have the appropriate base for the movement that you're doing. Okay? We'll start from here. We'll grab the floor with our feet. Even if you're wearing shoes, utilize that. Grab the floor. From there, we're going to look at the knees. Okay, so I do want to practice not necessarily locking out the knees, okay, but instead engaging the lower half of my body, screwing my feet into the floor, and driving those knees out. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple tips in a minute that will help with cueing that. From there, we're going to look at the hips. So when I screw my legs out, I'm going to get some activation in my abductors and in my glutes. And those are going to be big movers that are going to help with our hips in cueing and properly moving through these motions. Once I go from the hips, I'm then going to focus big on my core. Just like any motion that we do, if you want to do it effectively, if you want to do it correctly, if you want to be proficient at it, you need to engage your core. So I like to imagine bracing my ribs towards my hips, squeezing down, utilizing that. And then from there, we're coming up, looking at the shoulder, the head, and the neck. So shoulders are going to come back, especially if I am deadlifting and doing a pull. Okay, this is going to help keep that whole spine aligned, and it's going to prevent us from doing stuff like allowing these shoulders to roll forward, which in turn is going to probably pull forward in that thoracic spine, and it's going to possibly lead to a bunch of different complications in the movement itself. From there, I want to make sure that I'm not moving the neck in too aggressive of a way, not flexing or extending it too much, because again, it's all connected. Okay, you got your spine, your cervical spine all up here, and if you're moving it and you're causing a whole lot of stress in the upper part of the movement, then you can tend to see movement in the lower half as well. So we need to make sure that everything from top to bottom moves well. Okay, so that's talking about cueing with that. I'm going to go through a few things that are going to help first of all, talking about the deadlift in itself, okay, if you struggle just with getting the proper depth, if you notice that as you start getting lower, you can't get your hips down, we're looking at a mobility thing. Okay, so what I would encourage you is do some floor drills, work at hip flexion, work at hip extension, work at your internal and external rotations right there. Okay, so these are all going to be big things, movements in the hips that are going to make sure that we have the proper foundation to move through that. And there are a ton of drills. We're not going to get crazy deep into that today because I do want to give you some supplementary movements to focus on, but check your hips, okay? From there, what we can go for, we can also opt for an elevated deadlift. So if you have a Smith machine, or if you have weights that you can stack, or even pulling blocks for those of you that are familiar with Olympic lifting, we can get right here. And what I want you to focus on is coming here, cueing in the upper back, pulling that weight in your shoulders, standing up tall, and driving the hips through. So leading away from that, let's talk about different things that we can do to help cue into that. A tool that I love is going to be the hip circle. So using the hip circle, we can put this on right here. I prefer to use it right above the knee. I think that it does best without stressing the knees too much. Some people do face an issue of having that knee valgus, which is where those knees come together. So right here, placing it above the knee, you're going to get a really good chance to drive the knees out and get the hips activated, especially focusing on the abductors. So right here, what we can do lateral steps, coming back and forth right here, pulling with that leg. We can do forward and reverse marches where I'm focusing on contracting my glutes with each step as I push through and into that movement. Same thing if I go reverse, I want to reach with that, open those hips out. Notice I even take a step outside each direction. I can go for a death march, which is going to be kicking this leg out, locking that front leg, pushing the hips back, and then dropping down and sweeping towards the ground. Notice even when I'm doing this, I'm still focusing on externally opening up and rotating in that hip to get everything active. So going from that, okay, we can also look at unilateral options. So if maybe one side is focused more than the other, we can opt for a supported airplane. So if I want to come right here, ball up this extra fist, help to kind of key in the muscles that aren't actively working in the immediate moment, I can use this to help me stabilize, and then I can focus on standing tall, making sure that my hips don't open up as I kick back. So what I like to say, pinning the hips down, and then from here, dropping that chest and getting as close to parallel as we can with that motion to make sure that both of our legs are moving properly. So right here, you can do that same thing, dropping down here, getting that chest towards parallel while kicking that leg back at the same time. Another great option that I love to opt for, if you tend to roll your back, okay, if you have a hard time activating, keeping the shoulders pinned back, what we can also look to do here instead is going to be what I call a med ball bear hug hinge. So right here, you notice I'm going to wrap my arms around this ball. Depending on how long your arms are, you may interlock your fingers. I opt to grab for my wrist. And then from here, I just work on making sure that my feet are in that proper position, squeezing this ball so my shoulders come back, engaging the core, and then opening my knees out so that I keep my back flat and bring that chest level and focus on driving my hips back. Similar, okay, you can do that motion also with a target, okay? So if you notice that you have a really hard time pushing your hips back, you don't understand that cue, do it with something behind you. Start close. Work dropping the chest back here and touching your butt to the wall, and then create that distance from there. You can also do that with the med ball. And then finally, another option that can help train, if you tend to have an issue with bringing the hips through, okay, not only can we warm up doing glute bridges, which is where I'll lay on that floor, I can do it one leg at a time, I can do it both legs at a time, I can do it with the hip circle, but I'll start with my back lying on the floor. I'm not going to do it just because I have the mic on today. But from there, I'm going to work at bringing my hip from this flex position into extension, hips up to the ceiling above me. With that,